The morning sun rose over New Harmony like it had for the past 20 years. The crystal towers of the Vailari settlement caught the light and spread it across the valley in dancing rainbows. Children played in the gardens between the biodomes while their parents worked on the farms and in the workshops. Zeftar checked the water filters in Dome 7 for the third time that week. His blue crystalline skin showed the calm patterns of a content father. Through the clear walls, he could see his daughter Lilaine playing with her pet fluttermoth in their home garden. At 5 years old, she was just starting to show the empathic gifts of their people. Yesterday, she had sensed his worry about the broken irrigation system before he even told her about it. "Papa, why do the plants feel sad?" she had asked, her small hand touching a wilting flower. "Because they need more water, little star," he had answered, amazed as always by her growing abilities. The Vailari had come to this world to escape the wars that burned across their home sector. They were a peaceful people who believed in harmony with nature and each other. Violence was not in their nature. They had no weapons, no soldiers, no shields around their settlement. They thought their remote location would keep them safe. They were wrong. The first sign of trouble came when the sky grew dark at midday. Ships blotted out the sun, their massive hulls casting shadows over the entire valley. The ships were black and covered in spikes and weapons. They looked like the nightmares that haunted old stories. Alarms began to ring across New Harmony, but they were warning bells, not battle calls. The Vailari had no idea what to do when death came from the sky. Zeftar ran toward his home as fast as his legs could carry him. Other Vailari were running too, their skin flashing with fear colors, deep purple and crimson red. Some carried their children. Others helped the elderly. None of them ran to fight back because they didn't know how. The first ship landed in the center of town with a crash that shook the ground. Its doors opened like a mouthful of teeth and creatures poured out. They walked on two legs like the Vailari, but there the similarity ended. These beings were covered in dark scales and wore armor that looked like it was made from bones. Their eyes glowed red, and their mouths were full of sharp teeth, Krillians. Zeftar had heard stories about them but hoped never to see them. They were slavers who traveled the galaxy taking people to sell in the dark markets of the outer worlds. They especially liked to take children because young minds could be shaped and trained. "Lilaine," Zeftar called as he reached his home. His daughter was hiding behind the fluttermoth cage, her blue skin pale with fear. "Papa, the bad feelings are everywhere," she whispered. Her empathic abilities were picking up the terror and pain from everyone in the settlement. Zeftar grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the emergency shelter he had built beneath their home. It was a small room hidden under the floor, designed to protect them from storms. He hoped it would hide them from the slavers, too. They climbed down into the dark space and pulled the hidden door closed above them. Zeftar held his daughter close and tried to stay quiet. Above them, they could hear the sounds of destruction. Glass breaking, people screaming, heavy footsteps walking through their home. "Scanner shows life signs below," a rough voice said in the common galactic language. 2 of them. One small Zeftar's heart sank. He had forgotten about the Krillians' technology. Their scanners could see through walls and find hidden people. He held Lilaine tighter and whispered a prayer to the crystal spirits of his ancestors. The floor above them exploded inward. Debris rained down on them as armored hands reached into their hiding place. Strong claws grabbed Zeftar's arms and dragged him upward. Other hands took Lilaine despite her cries. "Papa! Papa!" she screamed, reaching for him. "Let her go," Zeftar shouted. But his words meant nothing to the slavers. The Krillian holding him was huge, with scars covering his face and arms. He wore a collar made of bones around his thick neck. When he smiled, his teeth looked like broken glass. "Crystal people bring good money," the creature said, "especially the young ones. They learn fast and break slow." Zeftar and Lilaine were dragged outside with dozens of other captured Vailari. The beautiful settlement of New Harmony was burning. The crystal towers lay broken on the ground. The gardens were trampled. Bodies of those who had tried to resist lay still in the streets. The slavers had divided their prisoners into groups. Adults in one area, teenagers in another, and children in a third. Zeftar watched in horror as they put metal collars around the necks of the youngest captives. The collars hummed with energy that would block their natural abilities. "Move," a Krillian guard shouted, prodding the prisoners toward the landing ships with an electric stick. As they walked, Zeftar tried to comfort the other families around him. Many parents were crying for their children. Some children called for parents who were no longer alive. The empathic abilities of the Valari meant they all felt each other's pain and fear. It was like drowning in an ocean of suffering. The inside of the slaver ship was even worse than the outside. It was a maze of metal corridors and holding cells. The air smelled like fear and death. Strange sounds echoed from deep in the ship, the cries of other captives from other worlds. They were pushed into a large holding area with metal bars for walls. The floor was covered in dirty straw. Buckets in the corners served as toilets. There was no privacy, no comfort, no hope. Lilaine pressed against her father's side, her small body shaking with fear. "Papa, when are we going home?" Zeftar didn't know how to answer. He looked around at the other families, all asking the same question with their eyes. When would this nightmare end? When would they see their beautiful world again? "Soon, little star," he lied, stroking her crystalline hair. Soon. But even as he said it, he could feel the ship lifting off from the ground. Through the small windows high above, he watched New Harmony grow smaller and smaller, until it was just a point of light. Then even that disappeared as they entered the darkness of space. The Krillians had taken everything. Their homes, their freedom, their future. They were heading toward the slave markets of the Outer Rim, where families would be torn apart and sold to the highest bidder. Zeftar held his daughter close and tried to be strong for her. But inside, his heart was breaking. He was supposed to protect her. He was supposed to keep her safe. Now all he could do was hold her in the darkness and hope that somehow, someway, someone would help them. The ship flew on through the void, carrying its cargo of stolen lives toward an uncertain fate. In the holding cell, the Vailari huddled together and tried to comfort each other. They shared what little hope they had left, but it felt as small and fragile as a candle flame in the wind. Their peaceful world was gone. Their simple, happy lives were over. Now they were just property, waiting to be sold to whoever would pay the most for their suffering. 3 days passed in the belly of the Krillian ship. 3 days of fear, hunger, and the constant smell of unwashed bodies and despair. The Vailari prisoners had been given water and food that tasted like cardboard, but it was barely enough to keep them alive. The slavers wanted their cargo healthy but not comfortable. Zeftar watched his daughter grow weaker each day. Lilaine barely spoke anymore. Her blue crystalline skin had turned a dull gray color that meant she was shutting down her empathic abilities to protect herself from all the pain around her. It was a survival response that young Vailari sometimes used, but it worried him deeply. "Papa, why don't the bad men have any good feelings?" she asked during one of her rare moments of speech. Zeftar didn't know how to explain evil to a 5-year-old. "Some people forget how to feel good things, little star. They only remember the dark feelings." "That's sad," she whispered. Other ships had joined them during the journey. Through the small windows, Zeftar could see a whole fleet of slaver vessels flying together. Each one probably carried hundreds of stolen people from dozens of different worlds. It was a business for the Krillians, as normal as farming or building houses was for other species. On the 3rd day, everything changed. The prisoners were lined up in the main cargo bay. Krillian guards with electric weapons stood around the edges of the room, while their officers examined the captives. They carried electronic tablets that showed prices and buyer information from the slave markets. "This batch looks good," said one of the officers, a female Krillian with ritual scars covering her arms. "The crystal people always sell well, especially the young ones." Zeftar's blood turned cold when he heard those words. He looked down at Lilaine, who was holding his hand so tightly that her small fingers were white with effort. She was trying to be brave, but he could see the terror in her large, dark eyes. The head slaver walked into the room, and all the guards straightened up with respect and fear. His name was Vexthor, and he was a legend among the criminal underworld. He was bigger than the other Krillians, with black scales instead of the usual brown. Old battle scars covered his face and arms. His eyes glowed like red coals in the dim light. Vexthor carried a metal collar in his hands. It was different from the simple restraining collars the other children wore. This one had wires and small machines built into it. It hummed with dangerous energy. "This one," he said, pointing at Lilaine. "She shows the strongest empathic readings. The collar will suppress her natural abilities and make her easier to train." The collar was designed to cause pain whenever the wearer tried to use their empathic gifts. Over time, it would condition them to stop using their abilities completely. For a Vailari, it was like cutting out their soul. "No," Zeftar said quietly. Vexthor looked at him with mild surprise. Did you say something, Crystal Man? I said no. Zeftar stepped forward, placing himself between the slaver and his daughter. You cannot have her. The other Krillians laughed, but Vexthor held up a hand to silence them. He seemed interested in this unusual display of defiance from one of the peaceful Vailari. And what exactly do you think you can do to stop me? The head slaver asked. Zeftar knew he was no match for the armed and armored Krillian. He knew that resistance would probably mean death for both him and his daughter, but he also knew that he could not stand by and watch them torture his child. He dropped to his knees in front of Vexthor. Please, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. She's only 5 years old. Take me instead. The cargo bay fell silent. Even the other prisoners stopped their quiet crying to listen. Zeftar's crystalline skin was flashing bright red with the intensity of his feelings. I'm an engineer, he continued, his words coming out in a rush. I know 12 different galactic technology standards. I can fix anything, build anything. I can work for 20 hours a day without rest. I'll never complain, never resist, never try to escape. Just please let my daughter go. Vexthor looked down at the kneeling father with something that might have been amusement. Your daughter will bring 50 times more money than you ever could, Crystal Man. Young Vailari are prized across the galaxy. Rich collectors pay fortunes for empathic children they can train from an early age. I'll work for free, Zeftar begged. A lifetime of free labor. That has to be worth something. Not enough, Vexthor said simply. Other Vailari parents began to join their voices to Zeftar's pleas. They offered their own lives, their knowledge, their skills, anything to save their children. The cargo bay filled with the sound of desperate parents begging for mercy that would not come. The collective empathic cry of the Vailari created a wave of raw emotion that even the Krillians could feel. Some of the guards shifted uncomfortably. A few actually took steps backward. But Vexthor had been in this business too long to be moved by the suffering of his victims. Enough, he roared, and the prisoners fell silent. Your feelings mean nothing here. You are cargo now, nothing more. The child gets the collar. He stepped toward Lilane, who was pressed against her father's legs. Her skin had gone completely white with terror. Zeftar stood up and spread his arms wide, trying to shield her with his body. I won't let you hurt her, he said. Then you will die. And I will take her anyway, Vexthor replied, drawing a weapon from his belt. The other Krillian guards raised their electric sticks, ready to beat down the defiant father. The prisoners watched in helpless horror, knowing they were about to witness the murder of a man whose only crime was loving his child. Vexthor aimed his weapon at Zeftar's chest. His finger moved toward the trigger. The Vailari father closed his eyes and whispered a final prayer to whatever gods might be listening in the darkness of space. Please, he said one last time. She's only 5. The words hung in the air like a challenge to the universe itself. Here was a father willing to die for his child. Here was love facing down evil with nothing but hope and desperation. Here was everything good about living beings standing against everything that sought to destroy it. In that moment, something changed in the ship around them. The lights flickered. A new sound echoed through the corridors, the sound of metal being cut by advanced tools. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to ring. Vexthor paused, his weapon still pointed at Zeftar's heart. What was that? The answer came in the form of explosions echoing through the ship's hull. Someone was attacking the slaver vessel, but who would be stupid enough to attack a heavily armed Krillian fleet in the middle of deep space? The head slaver's red eyes narrowed with suspicion and growing anger. He had been in this business for 30 years, and he had never had anyone dare to interfere with his operations. Find out what's happening, he ordered his guards, and kill anything that doesn't belong on this ship. As the Krillians rushed to respond to the attack, Zeftar held his daughter close and dared to hope. Maybe the universe had heard his prayer after all. Maybe someone was coming to help them. But who could possibly stand against the might of the Krillian slave fleet? 2 hours before the confrontation in the cargo bay, the human patrol ship UES Defiant hung in the darkness of space like a sleeping predator. Its hull was painted black to blend with the void, and its advanced stealth systems made it nearly invisible to most scanners. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge, studying the data her crew had gathered about the Krillian slave fleet. She was a small woman with short black hair and eyes that had seen too much suffering in the border worlds. For 6 months, she had been hunting this particular group of slavers after they attacked a human farming colony and took 37 people, including 12 children. 6 ships in the fleet, reported Lieutenant Martinez from the sensor station. Flagship is the Bone Reaper, a heavy cruiser with serious firepower. The other 5 are cargo vessels, probably loaded with prisoners. How many people are we looking at? Chen asked. Estimates suggest over 2,000 captives across all ships, Martinez replied. Mixed species from at least a dozen different worlds. Chen felt the familiar weight of command pressing down on her shoulders. The Defiant was a patrol ship, not a battle cruiser. They were outnumbered and outgunned. By all military logic, they should call for backup and wait for a larger force to arrive. But backup would take days to reach them, and by then the slavers would be long gone. "Ma'am," came a voice from behind her. Sergeant Marcus Torres stepped onto the bridge, still wearing his black combat armor from the reconnaissance mission he had just returned from. He was a big man with kind eyes and hands that could be gentle with his daughters or deadly with his weapons, depending on what the situation required. "What did you find, Sergeant?" Chen asked. Torres activated a holographic display that showed the layout of the slaver ships. I was able to get close enough to scan their communications and internal sensors. The Bone Reaper is definitely the command ship. They're processing prisoners for sale, including a large group of Velari refugees they picked up 3 days ago. Chen nodded. The Velari were known throughout the galaxy as a peaceful people who had never hurt anyone. The idea of them being sold as slaves made her stomach turn. "There's something else," Torres continued, his voice getting harder. "They have children on board. Lots of them. The youngest captive is a 5-year-old Velari girl." The bridge fell silent. Everyone knew that Torres had 2 young daughters back on Earth. Everyone knew how much he loved them and how much he missed them during long patrols in space. "What are our options?" Chen asked. Her tactical officer, a young man named Kim, pulled up several battle scenarios on his screen. Direct assault would be suicide. Our best bet is to send a message to Fleet Command and wait for reinforcements. "How long would that take?" Torres asked. 4 days minimum, Kim replied. 4 days, Torres repeated quietly. "You know what they do to kids in 4 days?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone on the bridge knew about the slave markets in the Outer Rim. They knew about the training programs and conditioning techniques the slavers used. They knew that 4 days was enough time to break a child's spirit forever. "I have an idea," Torres said slowly. "It's crazy, but it might work." Chen looked at him. "I'm listening." Torres pointed to a section of the Bone Reaper's hull. "Their cargo bay has weaker armor plating. If a small team could get inside the ship without being detected, we could disable their main systems from within, cause enough chaos to give the prisoners a chance to escape." "That's a suicide mission," Kim protested. "Even if you got inside, you'd be facing hundreds of armed Krillians." "Maybe," Torres said. "But humans have some advantages that most species don't expect." Chen knew what he meant. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 50 years ago. Most alien species saw them as primitive and emotional creatures who relied too much on instinct and not enough on logic. What those species didn't understand was that human emotions could be weapons. Fear made them fight harder. Love made them sacrifice everything. Anger made them unstoppable. "How many people would you need?" Chen asked. 6, Torres replied immediately. "My best Marines. We go in fast and quiet, disable their communications and weapon systems, then fight our way to the prisoners. The odds of success are less than 15%, Kim calculated. The odds of those kids surviving 4 more days are 0%, Torres shot back. Chen closed her eyes and thought about her options. She could follow regulations and call for backup. It was the safe choice, the smart choice, the choice that would keep her crew alive and her career intact. But it was also the choice that would condemn thousands of innocent people to slavery or death. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. "Do it," she said. Torres nodded and turned to leave, but Chen called him back. "Marcus," she said, using his first name instead of his rank. "Why are you really doing this?" Torres paused at the door of the bridge. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. "Because somewhere on that ship is a 5-year-old girl who's scared and calling for her daddy. And if I don't help her, how can I ever look my own daughters in the eye again?" An hour later, Torres and his team of Marines floated through space in their powered armor suits. They moved without engines, using only small thrusters to guide themselves toward the Bone Reaper. Their suits were designed to absorb sensor sweeps and appear as space debris on enemy screens. The team consisted of Torres and 5 other volunteers. Johnson, a weapons specialist with hands steady enough to thread a needle in zero gravity. Walsh, a demolitions expert who could make explosives out of spare parts. Rodriguez, a medic who had patched up more wounded than she cared to count. Park, a communications specialist who could hack any system in the galaxy. And Chen's own son, Lieutenant David Chen, a young officer who had insisted on joining the mission despite his mother's objections. They approached the Bone Reaper from below, using the ship's own hull to block them from sensor sweeps. Torres found the maintenance hatch he had identified during his earlier reconnaissance and began cutting through it with a plasma torch. "Remember," he whispered into his helmet communicator, "we're not here to win a war. We're here to save lives. Hit hard, hit fast, and get those people out." The hull plate fell away, revealing a dark corridor inside the ship. Torres dropped through first, his rifle ready, followed by the rest of his team. They were inside the enemy vessel now, surrounded by hundreds of armed slavers who would kill them without hesitation if they were discovered. But they were also humans on a mission to protect children. And that made them more dangerous than any weapon the Krillians possessed. Torres activated his helmet's tactical display and began moving toward the cargo bay where the prisoners were being held. Each step brought them closer to a confrontation that would test everything they believed about themselves and their place in the galaxy. Behind them, the Defiant waited in the darkness, ready to provide covering fire when the time came. Commander Chen watched the tactical display and whispered a prayer for her son and the brave men and women who had volunteered to walk into hell for the sake of strangers. The rescue mission had begun. Torres and his team moved through the corridors of the Bone Reaper like ghosts. Their powered armor made no sound on the metal floors, and their advanced sensors allowed them to avoid the Krillian patrols that wandered the ship's passages. The layout matched the intelligence they had gathered, but seeing the inside of a slave ship was different from reading about it in reports. The walls were covered in scratches and stains that told stories of pain and desperation. The air recycling systems carried the smell of fear and unwashed bodies from the holding areas. "Target is 2 levels down," Park whispered into their shared communication channel. He had hacked into the ship's internal sensors and was guiding them toward the main cargo bay. "I count 43 Krillians between us and the prisoners." "Any sign of the children?" Torres asked. "Thermal readings show multiple small heat signatures in the target area," Park replied. "But boss, the adults are all armed with military-grade weapons. This is gonna get messy." Torres paused at a junction in the corridor and checked his rifle's power cell. It was fully charged and ready for war. Around him, his team performed their own equipment checks with the quiet efficiency of professionals who had done this dance many times before. "Rodriguez, how many prisoners are we looking at?" he asked. The medic consulted her tablet, which was displaying the bio readings Park had pulled from the ship's sensors. 237 life signs in the main holding area. Mixed species, but I'm seeing a lot of stress indicators. Whatever they're doing to these people, it's not good. "Johnson, can you give me a route that avoids the main guard stations?" The weapons specialist studied the ship's layout on his display. "Negative. They've got the cargo bay locked down tight. Only way in is through the main entrance. And that's where they've got most of their firepower concentrated." Torres closed his eyes for a moment and thought about the 5-year-old girl waiting in that cargo bay. He thought about her father, probably trying to protect her with nothing but love and desperation. He thought about his own daughters, safe in their beds back on Earth, trusting their daddy to keep the monsters away from other children. When he opened his eyes, his decision was made. "Walsh, how much explosive do you have?" The demolitions expert grinned behind her helmet visor. "Enough to redecorate this whole section of ship, Sarge." "Good. Here's what we're going to do." The plan was simple and completely insane. They would blow a hole in the cargo bay wall and enter from an unexpected direction. The explosion would create chaos and confusion, giving them a few precious seconds to establish a defensive position before the Krillians could react. It was the kind of plan that could only work once, and only if everything went perfectly. But Torres had learned long ago that sometimes the impossible was the only option available. They moved to position above the cargo bay, where Walsh began placing charges on the floor. Through their helmet displays, they could see the thermal signatures of the prisoners below, hundreds of innocent people huddled together in fear, waiting for whatever horror would come next. "Charges set," Walsh reported, ready to make some noise. Torres activated his helmet's external speakers and set them to broadcast on the Krillian communication frequency. He wanted the slavers to hear what was coming for them. "This is Sergeant Marcus Torres of the United Earth Military," he said, his voice carrying through the ship's communication system. "You are holding prisoners in violation of galactic law. Release them immediately." The response came from the cargo bay below, harsh laughter and crude insults in the Krillian language. Torres didn't need a translator to understand the meaning. "I gave you a chance," he said quietly, then louder. "Nobody hurts the children." Walsh triggered the explosives. The floor of the corridor disappeared in a blast of fire and twisted metal. Torres and his team dropped through the smoking hole into the cargo bay like angels of vengeance. The prisoners screamed and dove for cover as chunks of debris rained down around them. The Krillian guards were caught completely off guard. They had been expecting an attack from the main entrance, not from above. Several were knocked down by falling metal, and the rest were temporarily blinded by the smoke and dust. Torres landed hard on the cargo bay floor and immediately opened fire. His rifle sent bolts of energy into the nearest group of slavers, dropping 3 of them before they could raise their weapons. Around him, his team spread out and took defensive positions behind cargo containers and support pillars. "Rodriguez, get to the prisoners," Torres shouted over the noise of battle. "Everyone else lay down covering fire." The cargo bay erupted into chaos. Energy bolts flew in every direction as the humans and Krillians exchanged fire. The prisoners pressed themselves against the walls, trying to stay out of the line of fire while their hearts filled with desperate hope. Torres fought his way toward the center of the bay, where he could see a group of Krillian officers standing around a small blue figure. Even through the smoke and confusion, he could tell it was a Vailari child. She was pressed against the legs of an adult male who was trying to shield her with his body. Between Torres and the child stood Vexa Thor, the legendary slaver captain. He was bigger than the other Krillians and wore armor that looked like it was made from the bones of his victims. In his hands, he held a weapon pointed at the kneeling Vailari father. "Stand down, human," Vex Thor roared. "Or I kill the Crystal Man and take his child anyway." Torres never slowed down. He had seen too many hostage situations to be intimidated by threats. The key was to keep moving, keep the enemy off balance, and never give them time to think. "I don't think so," he said, and put 3 energy bolt center mass into the slaver captain. Vex Thor's armor absorbed most of the damage, but the impact sent him stumbling backward. His shot went wide, scorching the wall behind Zeftar's head. The Vailari father grabbed his daughter and rolled away from the fight. The legendary slaver looked at the human warrior who had dared to challenge him and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Fear. This was not how battles were supposed to go. His enemies were supposed to be cowed by his reputation and superior firepower. They were supposed to negotiate and plead and offer bribes. They were not supposed to drop through the ceiling and immediately start shooting. "You have made a mistake. Human," Vex Thor snarled, raising a weapon that could punch through ship armor. "I have been killing for longer than your species has been in space." Torres ejected his rifle's empty power cell and slammed in a fresh one without taking his eyes off the Krillian. Around them, the battle continued as his team fought to secure the cargo bay and protect the prisoners. "Maybe," he said, "but I bet you've never fought a human father before." The 2 warriors circled each other in the center of the cargo bay, their weapons trained on each other's hearts. Zeftar watched from behind a cargo container, holding Liline close and trying to understand what was happening. This strange new species had come from nowhere to fight the slavers. They moved with a precision and fury that he had never seen before. They fought not for money or territory, but for something else. Something that made them willing to risk everything for strangers. "Why?" Vex Thor demanded, his weapon never wavering. "Why do you interfere? These are not your people. You have no claim here." Torres thought about his daughters sleeping safely in their beds. He thought about bedtime stories and goodnight kisses and the trust in their eyes when they looked at their father. He thought about every child who had ever needed protection, and every parent who had ever fought to provide it. "Because," he said simply, "she's only 5. The words hit Vex Thor like a physical blow. In all his years of slavery and violence, he had never encountered someone who would risk their life for such a simple reason. It didn't make sense to his predator's mind, but it made perfect sense to Torres, and in that moment the human opened fire. The fight between Torres and Vex Thor lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours to everyone watching. Energy bolts crossed in the air between them, lighting up the smoky cargo bay like deadly fireworks. The human's smaller size made him a harder target, while the Krillian's heavy armor absorbed shot after shot. But Torres had something the slaver captain didn't expect: the desperate fury of a parent protecting children. He moved like a man possessed, dodging the Krillian's fire while steadily advancing. When Vex Thor's weapon overheated from rapid firing, Torres closed the distance between them. The two warriors collided in hand-to-hand combat. Vex Thor was bigger and stronger, but Torres fought with a precision born of years' training to protect the innocent. When the slaver tried to grab him, the human slipped away and struck at weak points in the alien's armor. When Vex Thor swung his massive fists, Torres was already moving to a new position. The end came when Vex Thor made a mistake. Frustrated by his inability to catch the quick human, he lunged forward with all his strength. Torres stepped aside and let the Krillian's own momentum carry him into a cargo container. The impact stunned the slaver captain long enough for Torres to press his rifle against Vex Thor's throat. "Yield," Torres said quietly. Vex Thor looked into the human's eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. This was not the look of a soldier following orders or a mercenary fighting for money. This was the look of a father who would do anything to protect children. It was a force of nature that could not be reasoned with or intimidated. "I yield," the legendary slaver whispered. Around them, the battle was ending. The other Krillians had either surrendered or fled when they saw their leader defeated. Torres's team had secured the cargo bay and were already working to free the prisoners from their restraints. Rodriguez was moving among the captives, checking for injuries and offering what comfort she could. Park was hacking the ship's systems to unlock the cell doors. Walsh was setting charges to blow open the more secure holding areas. Johnson was guarding the entrances to make sure no Krillian reinforcements could interfere. And Lieutenant David Chen was kneeling beside a Valari father and daughter, offering them water and emergency rations. "Are you hurt?" he asked Zeftar in careful galactic standard. The Valari engineer shook his head, still holding Liline protectively. We are safe now." David smiled and nodded. "You're safe. We're going to get you out of here." Liline peeked out from behind her father's arms. Her crystalline skin was slowly returning to its normal blue color as the immediate danger passed. "Are you the good ones?" she asked in a small voice. "We're the ones who came to help," David replied. "Nobody's going to hurt you anymore." Torres walked over to them, removing his helmet so they could see his face. He was older than David, with lines around his eyes that spoke of too many battles and too much responsibility. But when he looked at Lilan, his expression softened. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. "Lilan," she whispered. "This is my papa, Zeftar." Torres knelt down to her level. "Hi, Lilan. I'm Marcus. I have 2 little girls back home and they're about your age. Did you come to save us because of them?" she asked with the directness that only children possessed. Torres considered the question seriously. "I came because no child should ever be afraid like you were afraid, and because your papa loves you so much that he was willing to die for you." Zeftar's eyes filled with tears. You heard?" "I heard," Torres confirmed. "And I want you to know that any father brave enough to do what you did deserves to see his daughter grow up free." The rescue of the Bone Reaper was just the beginning. Over the next 6 hours, Torres and his team, working with the freed prisoners, captured the other 5 ships in the slaver fleet. The Krillians were not prepared to fight an enemy that seemed to materialize out of nowhere and fight with such focused determination. More importantly, they were not prepared to face humans who treated the mission as a personal crusade rather than a military operation. The Marines fought like they were protecting their own families because, in their minds, they were. By the time reinforcements arrived from the human fleet, over 2,000 prisoners had been freed from ships across the slaver convoy. Men, women, and children from dozens of different worlds were finally safe. Medical teams worked around the clock to treat their injuries and trauma. The story spread quickly through the galactic communication networks. Within days, everyone in civilized space had heard about the humans who dropped through the ceiling to fight an entire slaver fleet. The rescue became legend, told and retold in a dozen different languages on 100 different worlds. But the real impact went deeper than just one successful mission. 6 months later, Zeftar stood in the council chambers of New Harmony II. the replacement settlement the Vailari had built on a new world. He was no longer just an engineer. The galactic community had elected him as a representative to help establish new laws against slavery and trafficking. Next to him stood Commander Sarah Chen, now promoted to Admiral for her role in destroying the Krillian slave network. Behind them sat delegates from 37 different species, all working together on what they called the New Harmony Accords. "The question before us today," Zeftar said to the assembled delegates, "is not whether we can eliminate slavery from the galaxy. The question is whether we have the will to do what the humans did, to risk everything for the sake of strangers." The Accords established something new in galactic politics, a mutual defense agreement based not on trade or military advantage but on moral principle. Any species that signed would pledge to protect the innocent, regardless of their planet of origin or political affiliation. It started with the Vailari, who had experienced firsthand what it meant to be saved by strangers. Then came the Tenthari, whose children had been rescued from the cargo ships. The Melgari joined after human forces helped free their captured colony ship. One by one, dozens of species added their names to the agreement. The humans found themselves at the center of something they had never expected: respect. Not the kind of respect that came from fear or superior technology, but the kind that came from moral authority. Other species began to look to them for leadership in matters of justice and protection. Torres retired from military service and opened a school on Earth where he trained rescue specialists from across the galaxy. His first class included Vailari empaths, Tenthari trackers, and human marines, all learning to work together to fight slavery and trafficking. On graduation day, he stood before his students and shared the lesson that had guided his life since that day on the Bone Reaper. "There will always be people who prey on the innocent," he said. "There will always be those who think might makes right, who believe that suffering is acceptable if it profits them. Our job is to prove them wrong." In the front row, a young Vailari woman listened intently. Her crystalline skin showed the deep blue of determination and hope. She had enrolled in the program under the name Lilane, though her friends at the academy called her by her chosen human name, Hope. She was no longer the frightened 5-year-old who had hidden behind her father in a slaver's cargo bay. She was a trained rescue specialist, ready to carry on the work that had saved her life. In her pocket, she carried a small crystal pendant that her father had given her, a reminder of the day when strangers became family, and mercy became a force that could change the galaxy. After the graduation ceremony, Torres was approached by a young reporter who wanted to know what had motivated him to risk everything for people he had never met. "You've heard this question before, haven't you?" the reporter asked. Torres smiled and looked out at his graduating students, who were already planning their first missions to help others. "Yes, but the answer is always the same. We did it because someone had to. Because somewhere in the darkness there was a 5-year-old girl calling for her father, and we couldn't turn away from that." The reporter scribbled notes, not understanding that she had just heard the founding principle of a new galactic order, the idea that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of profit or politics, the idea that the strong had a duty to protect the weak, no matter what species they were, the idea that nobody hurts the children, not while humans were watching. Years later, when historians wrote about the transformation of galactic civilization from a collection of competing interests to a true community of mutual support, they would trace it back to a single moment, a moment when a human father heard another father's plea and decided that love was more important than logic, the moment when Torres said, "Nobody hurts the children," and meant it.